Hey everybody, it's Gil here with the Sailing Vessel Dream Chaser. And in last week's episode, we went ahead and prepped the surface around the mast boot to go ahead and do a fiberglass repair. We're going to take the deck and fiberglass up the side of that particular mast step. So in this week's episode, we're going to continue that work. We're going to cut all the glass, we're going to put it around there and show you exactly how we went about doing it, as well as the results of it. There's a few other little things thrown in just based on the activities we did this week. Hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Hey everybody, we've had a couple of good warm days, or warmer, and the sun's out, everything's dry. So I think I'm going to go ahead and cut some of the fiberglass strips to go around that section of the mast. Feels like a good day to get it done. I can knock it out here on my lunch break, and by this evening I'll be able to see how well everything looks. So let me get some of the glass cut up. I know I need 3-inch wide strips. I need some 13-inch long ones, some 16-inch long ones, and then I'm going to make some corner pieces so I can blend the corners in real well. So let me cut up some chop strands.
I actually buy my chop strand mat at a place called Ken's Hardware in Gulfport, Mississippi. It's about 45 minutes from here. They stock a bunch of different weights and pieces. It's been really handy to do that way. But you'll notice I store it inside of a bag just to keep the fibers from getting all over the place when I transport it to or from where I store it. So what I'm doing here is just folding over and putting a basic crease at the place where I ultimately want to cut it. And I use the back of a blunt object. I use like the back of the scissors just to sort of rub it. It breaks some of the fibers. But you'll notice I actually don't cut the fiberglass. I like to tear it. Thank you, Andy at Boatworks Today, who showed me this. But if you hold your hand down on the part that you're going to leave remaining and then sort of lift up and tear the rest of it, it creates a lot of small wisps of fiber at the edge, which allow it to blend very well and curve. So I'm just cutting my two pieces at 19 inches, repeating that for the ones at 16 inches. You do see I use the scissors to just cut part of this in half. And then I'm creating a bunch of little squares here as well that I'll use for just patching each of those little corners. That's what those are for. And as I mentioned before, I always store all this inside of a bag just to keep the fibers intact.
Some of you may be wondering why I'm using chop strand mat instead of something like 1708 or woven. And the reason why is this is not really a structural repair. All I really want to do is essentially build up a waterproof barrier that goes from the deck and transitions up the side of that mast boot. So I think this is going to be more than sufficient to do just that.
I mixed up a small batch of epoxy resin in this small red cup, but be warned, if you're using polyester resin, don't use these cups. I then went ahead and painted this on the surface to wet out the existing material so that the glass had something to stick into, and then ultimately folded the piece of fiberglass chop strand mat right down into that particular spot. And you'll notice here what I'm doing is just taking the brush, just a small chip brush, and I'm using that to wet this out along with a little popsicle stick or scraper just to push and crease the glass right down into the corner. Again, I don't want to break it, but I do want to round it off on that very base corner down there. So it's hard to see in this video in fast motion, but I'm using a stipple motion where I'm pushing down into the fibers to go ahead and wet out all of the fibers across the board. Now move forward and do the exact same thing on the second side. Wet out the existing surface, bend the glass down in place, and again, cover and stipple that chop strand mat with the epoxy resin until it's completely translucent. That's when you know it is fully moistened and wet throughout and ready to be cured. You'll notice here I'm putting the corner pieces on, and again, just like the other parts, but this allows me to blend the two smooth pieces together on the corner, and I repeat this process around all four of them.
All right, I put whatever footage in I could get. I had the GoPro just kind of going on the side. I didn't move the cameras just because I was working against the clock and it was just myself, so I didn't set up multiple cameras for this shot. I had a limited amount of time. Let me kind of show you what I've completed here. So as we go forward up here to the mast boot, let me just kind of show you what this is looking like. And again, it's not the prettiest fiberglass job in the world. You can see the jagged edge on the top, which is fine. I'll come back and trim that with a knife or something along the top or a sander, but it goes into the corner and down onto the flat part of the deck, and it kind of fills up that whole section right there where it was ground down, the paint was ground off. So jagged edge on the top, but this should be good. And when we come over here and look right at this corner where I patched that area, I epoxy filled it before, and then right in here is where I went ahead and put 3 layers of chop strand mat around that corner. 2 on each side, or 1 on each side, and then 3 over the corner. So not the prettiest fiberglass work, but frankly it's going to do the job, and that should keep the water from coming down below. At least I hope. Since I'm not a fiberglass guy per se, I'm using my best educated guess as to what's going to solve this issue. So that's it. I'm off to pick up the little one from tutoring and take my next conference call. In case you're interested, there's where I was getting some of the footage from. Get the old GoPro attached right there. All right, it's been raining, so we are coming in to see how my fiberglass repair is doing. Let us then therefore see. Ha! Ha! So I like this. There's this dark spot right here, but that's actually like varnish or something that's not wet. It used to be leaking right out of these rods. This is where the threaded rod for the belaying pin rack went, and there was a frame around this. This is wonderful. I am thrilled at this right here. Yay!
Show the camera the angry faces. Ready?
Let me see your angry face.
Okay. Happy face. Sad face. Worried face. Scared face.
Surprised.
So it's a couple of days later. The boat does look good and dry down below around that mast where we did the fiberglass repair. That's awesome. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up the fiberglass. If you recall, it was little wisps kind of aiming upward there. It's now time to clean them up. I'm just going to use a sharp knife and trim it along the edge, and then I'll use a little sander and I'll sand the edge and bevel it so that ultimately it'll be ready for a sealant around that. Let me first go ahead and get it cleaned up. Let me show you what that looks like. One of the things I love is the ability to just kind of come up here and look out the front of the boat windows and see the deck and everything else. So here is the part that I'm going to go ahead and trim up. So we're going to go ahead and get started here and just work on trimming this right even with the wood. I don't know the best way to do it, so we're going to try it and see. Yeah, razor blade works pretty well. So I think that's a good way to start it. I'll end up doing this with a little bit more with a sander, but this is a good start. All right, it's a little thicker. I'm just going to go ahead and use a little chisel here instead. This is where there's 3 layers of it, if you recall, in these corners. The nice thing is I was able to get some of this stuff cut. It'll just save a little bit of time in the cleanup here, but it's important we get all these pieces picked up. We don't want these going in the water. And then when I sand this, I'll clean up the rest of this. So I'm now just going to go ahead and start sanding the edge of this. Try not to get too much on the stainless. The nice thing is this is stainless, so if I sand it a little bit and sort of scratch the surface, I'll be able to just buff it out very easily. But there we go. I'm using 80 grit sandpaper here. I could probably go ahead and use something much more coarse, but I want to start with something sort of fine here just to see how we do. We need something a little bit more coarse, so I'm going to go grab a 50 grit. This time I actually grabbed 80 grit as opposed to seeing the quantity of 50 at 220 grit. Duh. So after I've done the other three sides, I've kind of noticed that the first side could use a little more cleaning up. This is how you just get, you learn more as you go. So I've learned a couple of things on how to trim this along the edge. It's a little harder because the space between the edge of the wood and the stainless is much closer. It's not enough of a lip to hold the sander on. But I'm going to go ahead and leverage the chisel here to create this nice little ledge and get it nice and straight. There's times I'm using the mallet and times I'm purposely not because I don't want to dig into the wooden base here. But I do want to clean up some of this old sealant and varnish and other things that is just making it uneven along the top of this. It's what I'm using to guide my chisel. So Deb and I are now starting to consider, what are we going to put on the overhead, the ceiling, when we complete this work, right? We wanted to make sure nothing was leaking before we put the new ceiling up, and we're at that place now where we're starting to consider it. We're also thinking about giving the girls each their own ability to choose what their overhead will look like in their stateroom. It's a little risky on my part because I'm afraid the 12-year-old may ask for a dark ceiling, and I want something that's going to help brighten it up. But what we did was we went ahead and went to a flooring store and looked essentially at what you would think of as laminate hardwood flooring, like Pergo type of stuff, but this is not a Pergo brand. What's interesting, and nowadays they have 100% waterproof material. It has a limestone backing between the outer coating of the veneer where the wood grain looks and this cork underlayment. Shockingly enough, they say this can be soaked underwater. So we stopped by one of these stores. The guy actually gave us one of these planks because I want to see how flexible, how rigid it is to be applied to the ceiling and what it would look like as I drill a few holes in it, because I'm going to have to ultimately hold it to the ceiling with screws as well. As Deb's been working on the interior of the boat, she was sharing with me the other day inside of the cabinets here in the double bunk stateroom, the inside of the hull had condensation on it. Now, granted, it was cold outside and warm in here, but if we had clothes in there, those clothes would have been touching that condensation. So we're going to try a couple of things here to see about a simple way of insulating this. I'm going to try and use some of this material that's actually designed to go under your underlayment of your ceiling on a home in the attic. It is a foil-backed item that helps reflect some of the heat back out through the hull. It has air pockets, or essentially looks like bubble wrap, and then another layer of foil on the inside. So I'm going to try this. I'm going to cut a piece to fit in here. We're going to tape half of it up on the hull and half not, and then we're going to test it over this next week while it's going to be real cold in the boat. So I'm going to go ahead and get this put in here, and then we'll see what the results of that are. Just to get a good view of this in here, you can kind of see I have that aluminum tape all the way along the top, so it's preventing air from going in between and around this, short of on the bottom side right there. And you notice I didn't go all the way down. I want to sort of compare the difference. So what this will allow us to do is, on a day when it's good and cold outside and the heat down below has kept it nice and warm, we can put our hand against the hull below that, and then we can reach our hand in behind it and see if it's stopping the condensation essentially from forming, or if it's just blocking it from touching the clothes. I'd like to see if the insulation would stop it altogether. And I've seen a lot of people talk about insulation can reduce condensation. I've always struggled to completely understand exactly why. I don't know if the insulation is protecting the inside of the hull from the warm air, or if it's protecting the inside layer of fiberglass from the outside, cold. I'm not sure. So this is going to be my test, and I learn best by trying something and then seeing what the results are. It's just the way I learn. So got that set up behind me, and we'll check it out throughout this week. I'm going to be out of town for a couple days, but Deb can come by every day and sort of check the difference and see how it's working. Do us a favor, give us a thumbs up and a like. That sort of does help us quite a bit. Jack, do you need something, buddy? Come on. I hope you enjoyed this week's video and the one before it to show how to do some general fiberglass work. I'm certainly not a pro. I'm sure there's things I could have and should have done differently or better, but it does go to show that you are able to do some of this work yourself if you're willing to just give it a little bit of effort and take your time. So I hope you did enjoy it. Next week, we're going to show how to do some general maintenance on the dinghy. We've sort of neglected our dinghy for the last year or so while the boat's been in the yard. So I'm going to show how to do some cleanup on the hypoline, how to diagnose and troubleshoot a stiff steering on a dinghy, as well as throttle cables. And we'll see what else it needs. There could be more in that video when we dig into it. Bye, y'all. Safe sailing.